Hey guys, Dan here, and welcome again to that Paintball channel. For this episode, we'll be continuing our series on paintball accuracy and concluding our mini-series on marker accuracy. Now, in the previous two episodes, we've concentrated on the sameness of markers and showing how, despite all the hype, the nonsense, the rhetoric, the superstition, every single marker is exactly the same in terms of accuracy. From the highest to the lowest, most expensive to the least expensive. You know, you stick them all on a bench, put them all in a vise, run all the same paint through them, same velocity, same conditions, they're all going to be the same accuracy. But despite that fact, people nevertheless have a belief that certain kinds of markers or marker platforms are more or less accurate than others. So this, of course, raises the question, well, why is this? Now, in the first episode, we looked at a lot of the marketing hype, rhetoric, failed and horrible logic that went into those kinds of beliefs. And in the second episode, we looked at a lot of the mistakes in reasoning and perception that feed into those kinds of beliefs. For this episode, I want to look at some of the physical differences and characteristics of markers that may make them more or less suitable to a particular player. Now, it's important to make this distinction because somebody, listening to all this might say, well, wait a minute, it sounds, on the one hand, you're saying that they're the same, and now you're saying that they're different. That sounds like doublespeak. Well, no. Think of it like two bricks. They're both the same, they both weigh the same, but that doesn't mean that everybody on the planet is going to have the same level of difficulty lifting them. The bricks aren't different, but the people lifting them are. And in the same way, even though every single marker from an objective point of view is just as accurate as every other, that's not going to say that they're going to behave the same when individual people use them. There are physical differences from marker to marker to marker that may make them more or less suitable to a particular player. So, it is not the case that any one particular marker is objectively more or less accurate than another. But it is the case that some markers do work better for different people in different circumstances. And the reason that a big deal has to do with ergonomics. Markers are very different. You see this extreme angle, this grip frame, single trigger, the foregrip is very low. For some people, they find that to be very comfortable. And when they come out and they snap shoot, their hands and their arms and their body is oriented in a very natural way with respect to the marker. And so they might find that it's helpful to give them accuracy. When you contrast that with something like this autococker, this one has an 86 frame, so that it's very close to vertical, and the foregrip, the reg, comes out at about 15-degree angle. Now for me, I find this to be amazingly comfortable and very natural. My hands are not kinked or twisted in any uncomfortable kind of way. And the same thing with the slide trigger. It's just very natural to just pull that back. I'm not having to bend my wrists at any kind of strange angles. It's very natural and intuitive. And that is one of the biggest considerations with respect to accuracy. How a marker is able to work with your body. Now, the human body is very flexible. It's very adaptable. Pros get out there, particularly ones who have been in it for a long time, and they've shot a lot of different markers, and they can always make a marker seem and behave very well. And that's just because your body can conform to different kinds of things. It learns to adapt. It learns to make those little micro adjustments to get the ball to go where you want it to go. But there are real differences. Some people like, this foregrip is very close. It's very tight to the rear grip. Some people like a more stretched out grip. That's more comfortable for them. This reg sits very low. Some people like something that sits a little bit higher. The GMEC, that reg relative to the grip is very, very high, and some people find that to be beneficial. In the same way with an electro, I was joking before about shooting like this, but if you just sort of park your hand here and you're making a very stable platform, your fingers are not having to jerk the trigger, and that is another big consideration that people don't think about. Your fingers jerking the trigger, particularly if you're shooting one hand and you're reloading, if you're shooting a marker that's not comfortable for you, or the trigger is not comfortable for you, or it's a heavy trigger, that can cause you to jerk your hand. The Tipman, particularly the mechanism, this has got such a heavy trigger. You pull it. Now, I'm exaggerating that, but you see a lot of new players that are pulling the trigger like this, and it's a heavy trigger. And I think people don't realize that a little bit of twitch on this end of things translates to a huge difference downrange. So having a trigger that's very light, that's very smooth, that doesn't cause a lot of jerking in the marker itself goes a long way. Something else that contributes to this is the smoothness of, sort of the bolt. Now, I think, frankly, way too much is made these days of, markers having low kick or, vibration. Markers are relatively light, they're relatively smooth, and, in terms of kick, recoil is, it's a paintball. It's not going to generate a ton of recoil. But if the trigger is not good for your body, and if the trigger pull is really stiff, and maybe if there's a lot of vibration, that can cause your hand to sort of, twitch off of target. So I find, honestly, something like an Automag, which has a relatively very light trigger pull, and the marker is heavy. This is heavier than certainly a lot of your modern mechanicals. This is a decently weighty marker. It's not terribly heavy, but it's heavy. But that weight actually adds stability, so that particularly when you're shooting very fast, the weight, and this has very low vibration, so it's a very smooth shot. And those who have shot a lot of the older Electros, especially, those old things were just so heavy, but they shoot amazingly smooth. They're so stable because that weight, that mass, resists movement, including movement even from pulling the trigger, so that it just feels like, almost like you're shooting a cloud. They're just so soft. It's like a Rolls Royce of markers. They're big and they're heavy and they're very luxurious feeling, and they can be very accurate because they're so stable. That weight, that mass, dialing back on the vibration makes them extremely stable. Another consideration has to do with your bottle's length from the grip. So this is something that's undergone a number of different transmutations, a lot of doctrinal fads and movements and disagreements and things like that. The most recent general trend has been the sort of elbow rule. Now there's a couple variations on this. One of them is you take your marker and you extend it at arm's length, and you want the bottle to be at the crook of your elbow with your arm extended. The other doctrine says, well, you bend your elbow and you want it at the crook of your elbow with it bent. Now, of course, the straight arm version is going to be a little longer, and the crooked arm variation is going to be a little shorter. But honestly, I would not subscribe to something like that, hook, line, and sinker, just because professional players are doing it. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't pay attention to what professional players recommend. I think there's another kind of counter movement that's also equally silly that says, "Oh, pros are dumb. They don't know what they're doing, or who cares what they do." Are you kidding me? They're professionals. You ignore the advice of a professional to your own detriment, assuming you actually want to get better as a player. Now, it doesn't mean that everything that pros say is gospel, but recognize that they're at the top of the game, and they're constantly making changes, making improvements to try to get that edge. So does that mean that every single thing that they hit on is the be-all, end-all? No. But does it mean that there's a good reason for them to have arrived at that? Yeah, and you should pay attention and listen to that. But that is something that I hear a lot of people talk about, how far should my marker stretch out? Should it be in tight? Should it be, far out? Honestly, that is something that you will have to determine for yourself. What I do, get yourself a rig extender. This is a very good one made by CP. Comes on and off very easily. It adds about, 1.5 inches or so. I mean, heavens, if you really wanted to, you could either get a longer bottle, or if you don't like the weight of the bottle, stack these up. I mean, I've seen some of these, I think I've seen people run 2 of these even. The point of it is for you to be comfortable. You want your rig, your setup to go with your body. Don't worry about what somebody else is doing. Listen to people's advice, but don't worry that what you're doing is fundamentally different from somebody else. You need to make your body comfortable when you're playing. That's what it's about, because all the advice that people are giving you, they're not out there on the field playing for you. You wouldn't want them to be anyway, presumably. It's you that's out there, and you need to make sure that your rig, your setup is comfortable and beneficial for you. Another thing to consider too is the height, where the tank is situated relative to, the barrel axis. That can make a big difference. Some people prefer their tank to come up a little bit higher. This one has a little bit of a drop. For me, for this, that feels a little bit more comfortable to me. And indeed, some people run drops. That was a big thing back in the day. It's fallen out of fashion, but there was a reason why people did that. Some of it was because the bunkers were a little bit different. You wanted to play tight, but some people, for their body style and their playing style, they find that drop to be very, very comfortable and very, very enabling with respect to putting that first shot on target. And that is one of the big things to consider. You as a player finding something that fits your body, and maybe a way to do it is just kind of, think about coming out from behind a bunker. Well, how do your hands naturally sit? Does one hand tend to want to be higher or lower? You may want to think about getting a marker that just naturally has parts and grips that fit what your hands naturally want to do. And again, you can adapt, but it really, I think, goes a long way to find a marker platform that corresponds to your body so that you aren't fighting the equipment. The equipment should enable you to play at your best. You shouldn't be, you've got enough trouble fighting against your opponents. You shouldn't be fighting your own equipment. So hopefully that's been beneficial and helpful in some way. And again, I just really want to strongly highlight that it's, we don't need, all of this superstition and hocus pocus about markers. Every marker is potentially the most accurate, but some markers may help you to be a little bit more accurate, and it behooves you as a player to sort of do some testing, do some research, and figure out what works for you. Well, hopefully that was helpful. Looking forward to the next episode. Hope you're all as well. And as always, come on back, bring a friend.